from now on, the session will get recorded. Awesome. And guys, if it's great, again, I think the episode 1 we got started this time around. The more the interactions, the better it is. I know some of you would be probably in, if you will, gag order or so on and so forth. Professional commitments. I can completely understand, respect that. Discuss, it's better. And if it's possible, switch on your cameras. The discussions becomes even more easy, right? So that would be fantastic. Thank you so much. Very, very warm welcome. Season 2. COVID really taught us a few things. Somebody said that letting go of an opportunity is the worst thing. Letting go of a crisis actually is the worst possible thing. I'm still trying to grapple around what the opportunity COVID has presented to us. One thing for sure which has come to my to my limited mind as a conclusion, that digital consumption will get accelerated. It has got accelerated, will get accelerated as we move along. And it will not be just the social medias. It will be about how we normalize across globe, right? Right from performance, talent, engagement, everything, to a new, if you will, normalizer, which is digital, which is as objective as it can be. I think that folks' ability to assimilate that has really increased, is my opinion of being in my industry for last 3-4 months. I'm seeing that really moving fast, not only in cricket, but in other sports too. And in some sports, they are really leading the game. So this is my big learning so far in last 3-4 months. Season 2, we stick to something which has worked well. Navneet, if you can move to the next slide, please. The format remains the same. We will give you another case study. Difficult to create case studies when people are not playing, I must say. But we have few in our, wallet, if you will, and some interesting piece of trivia. We are trying to now really peel the onion below, right? And you'll see that in a bit. We have Craig. Again, I had the pleasure to meet him before, but really have in-depth discussions in the last few weeks. And I'm just amazed amount of science and data can really create meaningful stories of how to move the needle. Really looking forward to Craig's conversation there. And then we have an open house. We'll try to keep it as less monologue as possible. Craig has assured that please ask as many questions as possible and get the discussion going. Nav, next slide, please. Case study, again, one of the elite players somewhere across the globe. We do not disclose players' names and their whereabouts. This young player, it's very interesting. When he was playing, during his bat lift, there was a bit of pause. Nav, if you could mark the pointer, mouse pointer. If you can see here, he was just pausing a bit, and you will see a lot more yellow lines there. That means that the bat was really moving a bit slow, right? And coach saw this and validated this with straight bat. And what happened was that they started working on him, said that let's get the bit of a momentum into his bat lift, right? And they started working on it. After a few reps and few sessions, he got, if you can see on the left after the change, right? You can see the difference, distinct difference in back lift. There was a 38% increase in swing speed while playing aggressive shot after a change in back lift motion. 38% change in bat speed. I think we have this, again, we know there has to be a bit of momentum in the bat lift, but this proves that what it can create as an impact if you have a fluent motion doing a back lift. Yeah, the impact was, I think, really cool to see that's the impact a player can get, and hence power he can generate if he has a smooth, fluent back lift. Yeah. Next slide, please. We were just, kind of really playing with the data which we had. More than 30% of them with elite players, right? So we really started playing around with it. And something which I learned during these straight talk episodes is that one, as we move to the shorter form of the game, cricket may not be just an over milestone game. It can be, somebody said that in this episode, in this straight talk episode, is that it may move to one ball as an event and not an over as an event, not an over as an event. And you have to maximize the opportunity of a 360-degree play. So when we were working with that hypothesis and we wanted to see our players maximizing that 360-degree play, we saw that players in the V, and when they're playing square of the wicket, there's a distinct difference in timing efficiency. A right-hander, square of the wicket has, I'm talking about the elite players, yeah? I'm not talking about the grassroots level. State level and above, have 84% timing efficiency when they're playing square of the wicket versus 91 in the V. And a left-hander across has 91% timing index versus 94. The question which came to our mind, and this is what we want to leave you guys with, is that our 360-degree play, are we maximizing full potential? Timing efficiency is, are we able to transmit full power at the time of impact onto the ball? And there is a definite difference when you're playing in the V versus square of the wicket. Thought it was an interesting piece of information, and what can be done to ensure that this gets lower and moves higher towards 100%. Yeah. With this, I wanted to hand over to Craig, but before that, Craig and myself were discussing, and we wanted to ask you a question. Sharad, if you don't mind, can you pull up the question, please? And I'll read it out to you for your benefit. In your pathway systems, your talent development systems, what order would you prioritize the following when trying to identify future international level, all forms, all conditions spin talent? I'll repeat. In your pathway system, in what order would you prioritize the following attributes when you're trying to identify the future international level, all forms, all conditions spin talent? A 17-year-old who is targeting, whom you want to select for under 19 World Cup in 18 months' time. The attributes are results, so many wickets, so many such average in underage cricket. Shape, hard spun balls with an ideal seam position. So how's the shape of the ball? The technique, sound technical base. Accuracy, how accurate he is when he's landing the ball at the right place. Athletic attributes, important for transferring energy onto the ball, as well as fielding. Revolutions, yeah, how many times the ball rotates per second or minute, what's the rev he's giving. And tactical know-how, does he understand the good classical game sense? Does he have an understanding of where the game is, how it is poised? So these different attributes want you to take a bit of time. It's not you can select multiple choices here, but ideally top 3 at max, right? Select what you think are the most important attributes for a 17-year-old you are selecting for as a future spin talent for international level across format. Anybody needs 30 odd more seconds, or shall we close the poll? You need not give your responses in the chat. You can just select it by clicking on the different options so that it goes into the poll. Cool. So we'll close the poll now. We will, and hold on, we will share the results, but a bit later, right? So please do remember your points, and we'll come to this in a bit. Yeah, I'll hand it. I'll hand over to Craig. And Craig, towards your session, I would love to hear your views on this point which you're discussing. That what attributes you look for. Yeah, Craig, towards.
Thanks, Kagan. And thanks again for obviously providing the platform with Straight Talk. And thoroughly enjoyed the previous ones that I've been able to sit in on, and well done to the presenters. I certainly got a lot out of it. And as I say, it's providing a platform for us all to become better cricket people and help our jobs in general. So, look, and the stuff I'm going to go through is purely my opinion. It's based on generally a fair amount of research and sometimes backed up with a bit of fact or a bit of data on there. So please, at any stage, if someone feels as though that they'd like to have some input or to call me out on some stuff, then please do it. I think it would be great to have that type of discussion around what we're about to talk about in there, which is creating adaptable spinners. And we're going to focus mainly on the long form, which is Test match cricket, because generally that's where the shortfall sort of is at the moment. If you look at the top ICC rankings at the moment, there's no spinners in the top 10. I think one-day cricket, there might be one or two. A couple of the Afghan spinners, I think, are in there. And then T20 cricket, it's 9 out of the top 10. And then obviously down from there, there's a lot more as well. So really it's about, again, it's how we set them up and some of the attributes that we might look for to start to get some of these people into our systems to be able to create adaptable spinners on there. So a lot of it's brought out from a sort of a long list of spinners that have come to our country, come to Australia, and also probably South Africa to a certain degree, where it's sort of non-abrasive conditions, and how some spinners with incredible overall records have come here and probably struggled. And we'll try and maybe put some context around why that might be, and maybe why when we do sort of get a good spinner, generally they are quite adaptable and they can be quite productive in all conditions. It's not always the case from the start. I suppose if we use Nathan as an example, obviously he's always been pretty effective in our conditions, but sometimes he struggled in the subcontinent. But over time, he's been able to adapt, where some of the spinners that are sort of set up for highly or more abrasive conditions, when they come to our conditions, sometimes they really struggle. And I'll try and put a little bit of context around that. So hopefully that makes a bit of sense. So now if you can go to the first slide. So here are some of the numbers, just to put a bit of data behind the stuff that we're going to talk about. And again, this is no reflection on the spinners. I think a lot of these spinners have been incredible and certainly had some times in Australia as well. They've been really effective. But overall, I mean, we use Ashwin as the first example, 365 wickets overall at 25 in Australia, 27 wickets at 48. Nathan Lyon, 390 wickets at 31, Australia 191 at 31.9. So very similar in Australia as he is in all conditions. Moen, 181 wickets at 36, 5 wickets at 115 in Australia. Yash Yashar, I think he took 200 wickets in his first 32 test matches, 213 at 30 in Australia, 12 wickets at 90. Graham Swan, 255 at 29, 22 at 52 in Australia. And Pereira I put in there because he's someone that in his conditions we really struggled with. He got 15 wickets in a 3-test series at about 25, whereas in Australia, 2 wickets at 144. So, and this, I mean, it doesn't stop there. There's probably a long list. We had Mitch Santner out here last year that we got 1 for 260 in the test series last year, in the same series that Gaz got 18 wickets at 19. I think Imran Tahir had one go at none for 260 in the one test match he played. So there's sort of a long list, and it's probably maybe 25 odd years before I think Sir Clane was quite effective in our conditions. A lot of that was probably around him producing the Doosra. But even in doing that, he probably did a lot of the things that we probably will talk about shortly. I think he got, what was the claims numbers? 14 wickets at 34, I think he got. He's one of the few that sort of averaged under 40. Dan Vittori is another one that had some success at times in our condition. And he's one that I use a lot when referencing other spinners that are quite adaptable in there too. So, Nav, if you want to just duck over to the next slide. So this just sort of puts, again, a little bit of, I suppose, idea of what's required in different conditions. And this is from a finger spin point of view. And you can see in Australia, high revs, high overspin is pretty much a minimum requirement in our conditions. And it's not easy to do. And we'll go through some things that might be able to help, people when setting up their spinners. So England, sort of moderate revs, moderate overspin. You'll be able to get away with. The wickets are there, especially the dry ones and sometimes the sort of stickier green ones don't require as much overspin to be able to get the ball to move off the wicket. And subcontinent, sort of low revs, high side spin and high accuracy. And I suppose their philosophy, I don't think, I can't remember who it was. I think it might have been Zubin. I think when I was at the World Cricket Academy, he told me that in the subcontinent, for them to want to play first-class cricket, you've got to bowl 5 days a week, 4 hours a day. You want to play Test cricket 7 days a week, 4 hours a day. So hence where their high accuracy comes from. And I probably feel as though that we could probably learn a little bit from that. But some of the things that we'll go through might sort of put into factors of why sometimes it might be a little bit difficult to put those sort of hours in, the amount of effort that's required to be able to bowl with that seam position in Australia. Does that make sense to most people?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I want to go on to the next slide. So what I thought I'd do is I just do a little bit of I suppose two incredible spinners and some that have had success in all conditions. Ashwin, as we put on there, hasn't been quite as effective in Australia, and there's probably a number of reasons for that. But I thought I'd just do a little side by side as far as what it takes to be able to bowl with high overspin. And one of the first things is just how much that we have to use our bodies in there, because when you're bowling with that seam position, if you don't have all the force and all the energy going right behind the ball and using your whole bodies, you'll just bowl too slow with it. And then they'll just be bowling step hits and you'll get whacked. So you'll default to going to a square, a seam. And if you look at the first image, the top and bottom one there on the left-hand side, you'll just see just how much Nathan engages his right leg. Again, we've always sort of used hip high as a reference point. Has a good jump, whereas Ashwin, his right foot's sort of barely getting off the ground, around just above sort of knee height. In there, and if you look over on the right-hand side, again, his front arm's at its highest point and his left knee's at his highest point, where if you look at Nathan's front elbow and left knee, it just goes to show just how much effort is required. And I used a ball from Nathan, again, because we'll touch on this again shortly. This is his last wicket that he got, last left-hander. He actually got a right-hander out, but I wanted to use a left-hander. The last wicket he got after a long summer. So just to show what type of an athlete you need to be able to bowl with overspin for a long period of time. And if you go to the next slide in there too, just to show the completion. And if you look at where his right hand completes to and the amount of hinging that he's got in his body, again, an enormous amount of effort that's required in there. And you'll see Ashwin sort of completing somewhere around about his left hip. And this is Ashwin in subcontinent conditions, okay, where you can sort of work a horizontal plane and you don't really need to use a lot of your body in there, because you can bowling with high side spin is a lot easier to do to be able to create pace and force behind the ball on there. So I thought they're two really good illustrations of just how much you've got to be using your body to be able to bowl with high overspin in there too. So we go to the next slide. I remember reading a story about Ashwin when he went to England. He made a concerted effort, probably 12 months out, that he wanted to start beating people in the air to be more effective outside the subcontinent. in there. So he remodeled his action, and you can see that in that image compared to the last one, just how much he's using his bottom half, and also that front arm usage in there as well. And he actually developed more momentum in his run up. He had a jump, and he was able to really challenge England on what weren't as abrasive conditions as he's used to in his hometown. So I thought that was a really good example of someone that made a choice that I've got to start beating people outside of my environment in there too. So what he did do, if we go to the next slide, I've got a couple of videos. There's one that shows that the ball that beat Cook early, and there's also one that's very late in the series in there too, where pretty much his body had shut down by that period because it took so much effort and so much vigor and energy in his action, and that his body started to pack up a little bit, and he couldn't sustain it over a long period. And again, it goes back to, I suppose, some of the things that I've sort of talked about from Gaz's point of view, and we will talk about from an athleticism and how we develop our spinners as athletes, and how much time they use bowling versus their conditioning in there as well. So we want to just run the Ashwin one, and just particularly look at the seam position and look at the effort and energy in his action. Yeah, so you all would have noticed, obviously, the seam position there. Beautiful seam position. If he bowls that same ball without that same vigor and energy, it's lifeless, and it doesn't have the same zip and the same drop in the air, and he's obviously not as competitive in those conditions in there too. And you'll see on the next one, again, try and take notice of, I suppose, how painful it looks when he's bowling it, because he's pretty cooked by the end of the series, and just how lifeless the ball is. It's not the greatest shot in the world from Curran, but I think he did get 70 out of about 250. So he was entitled to play the shot that he did, I think. But so we just run it, just have a look at it, and just try and, I suppose, gauge the lifelessness in the ball, and also what it does with his action. So again, I suppose just what it takes physically to be able to bowl with that seam position that we're talking about is it's a lot of effort. It's a lot of vigor. You need really good conditioned athletes to be able to do it. And Nathan is a very dynamic athlete. You can see the way that he moves in the field. He's one of our best fielders in all forms of cricket in there. And I think that goes a long way of him being able to produce the energy that he does on the ball at that seam position. So again, if you don't have it, it's going to flop out, and it's just going to be non-challenging in there. So go to the next image. Again, these are the two people that I would encourage people to research and have a look at what they do from an action point of view. And these are the two I sort of use when coaching young spinners that are in their formative years. And again, you'll just see just how much of their bodies and how much vigor. You look at Daniel Vittori, in that first image, the jump, the front arm. You'll see Nathan. The other thing is, if you look at the second image, just how locked in that front arm is, which means that they've worked the vertical plane for a long period of time. What you'll find is a lot of the subcontinent spinners actually work their shoulders horizontally to try and generate the power. And you'll see a bit of a gap between that left elbow and the hip in there too. So, and again, that last image of that leg drive and the force that's required behind the ball in there. Again, the ones that work the shoulder plane, that leg tends to just fly out a little bit, and they over rotate on there. But again, they're spin bowlers, but it just goes to show what it takes to be able to bowl and be an adaptable spinner in there, because Daniel Vittori is probably one that he's probably been one of the more adaptable in there. Just his ability to be able to bowl with square seams and swing it and do all the things he's done. That doesn't mean that he's bowled with that high overspun ball every ball, but when he needs to, he can. I think it's a lot to do with the way that he was technically set up. And Nathan, you've never seen someone more in love with their stock ball than Nathan, especially the first sort of 4 or 5 years of his career. It was pretty much all he bowled, and probably in some of the areas that he went to, he probably struggled a little bit because of it. Sometimes you do need to square your seam up to challenge the people, because sometimes that overspun ball can come off the wicket a little bit slow and sort of sit up and be non-challenging. And I think the mix of that high overspin and to be able to adjust your wrist around, and it's much easier, as I say, it's much easier to do when you're set up to bowl with overspin than it is if you're set up to bowl with side spin and then try and bowl with overspin in there. So hopefully that makes sense. Please stop me if I'm not making sense and I'm talking gibberish. So here's one of Nathan's balls, and I use this one again because you'll notice, or some of you will notice by the seats, that it's at the Gabba, and it's also a pink ball test. So it's probably every right for Australia not to be playing a spinner in these conditions. But again, you'll see just how effective he is, and a lot of it's because of the things we spoke about, that seam position, the energy, the drive, the vigour, the revolutions that are on the ball. You know, when you look at his last tour of India, in there where, you know, him and Ashwin had a full series together, it's fair to say that maybe Nathan even outbowled him in his own conditions. In there, I think Nathan got 19 wickets at 25 and Ravi got 21 at 27 in there. And put that into context again, that Nathan's bowling to incredible players of spin, and Ashwin was bowling to players that don't tend to face a lot of spin in their first class system at the moment, which is another story for another day in there. But and then I've got one of Daniel Vittori too, which is a little bit similar. You want to go to the next slide, Nev? So here's my unbelievable paint illustration that I chopped out in there. It sort of gives you a bit of an idea of where they start their more than a walk forward momentum in there, where they sort of start to get out of a walk and into more of a counter. And probably in Vittori's, he had quite a lot of momentum in his action, and that might have been making up for maybe not being as physically dynamic as some of the other guys probably in this thing. Maybe Jack Leach might be someone that might be maybe more suited to a Vittori type physical attributes in there, whereas I think Don Best looks like the way he moves in the field. And Ravi Jadeja, to me, he's an incredible athlete, but with what he does, he probably only really is using in his action, he's only using around about 60% of what his assets are in there. And he's someone that I feel probably could be if he used all of his body, added more momentum, and was able to bowl with that seam position, I think he'd be an unbelievably adaptive spinner in there too. So some food for thought, I suppose, for some of those guys on that screen, that you might be, I don't know when's too late to start looking at some of these things, but we're going to have test matches in Australia coming up soon, and you're going to be picking spinners to come here. I think in their current makeup, be looking at their attributes as far as revs and energy, that some would say that there's potential that they might have a similar result to the ones that have come before them in there. So again, I'm not sure if you can see it on there, but I actually had Derek Underwood on the bottom of it, and there he couldn't quite fit him a screen, but he's someone that I'm sort of surprised that no one's mimicked or imitated in there. Again, that amount of force and energy that he would have got out of his action from his run-up would have meant that if he bowled with that seam position, he would have been incredibly challenging. Because it's my belief, if you can bowl with that seam position, I don't think you can ever bowl too fast in there. If you can bowl with that amount of overspin in there. I sort of laugh a lot of the times when I'm watching Nathan on there, and a lot of the commentators are saying that he's bowling too fast, and then he bowls a hard overspun ball, and they go, that's it, that's much better. And then you look at the speeds, and it's pretty much exactly the same in there. A lot of the times, if he's bowling too quick, it looks like he's bowling too quick. It's generally because he seems a little bit square for the conditions, and his trajectory's just flattened out a little bit. So he's pretty good at adjusting now and being able to go, no, this wicket requires high overspin. Or sometimes, even in Australia, if you get to Adelaide Oval, or sometimes a dry SCG, you can certainly square your seam up a little bit. And it's probably noted the ones that have done well in Australia. I think Graham Swan did quite well in Australia at Adelaide Oval. It's been at Adelaide Oval where you can square your seam up in there, but when they've had to go into conditions where they've had to bowl with high overspin, generally they've struggled a little bit there too. So again, that's it from a finger spin point of view. That sort of gives you a bit of an idea of what there's a lot of other things that go into it from a shoulder path and that sort of stuff. But this is just a bit of an idea of what it might take and what you might need to start to, if you want to create adaptable spinners for all conditions and get people to beat people in the air, not just rely off the wickets. And these are some of the things you might need to do, because some of the wickets are changing around the world, and I think the subcontinent wickets in particular, India, I don't think you're going to see the dust bowls that you've probably had in the past, because they've got some serious fast bowlers now. And I'm not sure Virat wants to bat on the dust bowls that often in there. So I reckon the wickets will be flattening out. So there might need to be a bit of a change in philosophy as far as, being able to put more effort and energy into your actions, which means you might not be able to bowl 4 hours a day. You might have to do it an hour and a half, 2 hours a day, just with full intensity, with full effort in there, and try and create some spinners that really rev it with high overspin. Like I say, that's from a finger spin point of view. We go to a leg spin point of view. I'm using Yasir Shah again. 200 wickets at 32, but in Australia it's 12 wickets. So 200 wickets from 32 games, but Australia it's 12 wickets at 90. And he has a lot of the attributes that you would really look for in a spinner. And it's probably just one thing that, from my point of view, that he struggles with, and it's just his seam position. He bowls a really square seam. Again, from used to bowling in Dubai and subcontinent conditions where you can get away with that square seam. And one of the things he does, if you go to the next screen, Nav, if you look at where his right arm trails to, it trails towards his right knee. And again, that's a thing that I've seen with a lot of young leg spinners that are coming through now. And I think it's a fair bit to do with the T20 format and them wanting us to bowl into the wicket with a square seam and just try and hit that sort of 4 or 5 metre length in there. And you'll see that the top of that green mark is where his release came from, and it went down to his right knee in there. And we've had some examples of even our spinners that we've sort of had to try and work on this, some quite successfully in there too. So again, he's someone that from a revs point of view, I think his revs are sort of 2.6 from the stuff that I've looked at in the past, which is more than adequate for our conditions. It's just the seam position. And I think there's also the other thing from that seam position point of view, that a lot of coaches will coach that, because they've sort of coached off the Warne highlights a little bit. Every one of Warne's highlights, of his wickets, they're all bowled, and quite often it's into the balls that have pitched into the rough day 4, day 5, where he has squared his seam up a lot in there, and the ball's sort of gone sideways out of that rough. But the reality was, and I had this conversation with him in Melbourne this year, and he was sort of finishing my sentences as well, which is good. That he was, that day 1, day 2, he had to bowl high overspin and pitch more middle and off, and spinning away to be able to control the batters. And as I say, most of the highlights are all bowled in LBW, but the reality was that 65% of his wickets were caught in there, and only 35% bowled in LBW. So, that seam position again is highly crucial in our conditions in there, and non-abrasive conditions in there. So we go to the next slide. I suppose this is just an example of Warnie's arm path. In there again, it's come from a fantastic front arm path in there too, where again he locks it into that front hip, and he's got a beautiful vertical plane in there. And if you go to the next one, you'll see through his release just how he never goes the other side of that line. So from that release point, it's straight down the line. So there's all the forces behind the ball. So it allows him to be able to bowl with overspin when required, because if you're cutting across the ball and trying to bowl with overspin, you'll generally all the life comes out of the ball and it'll just sit up and get whacked. So he goes down there and ideally, through to your left side, Warnie generally finished in his middle, which is perfectly fine in there. So some examples of ones that sort of do it well. Go to the next slide, Nav. Chahal, I think, has got a beautiful arm path and he's quite well set up for our conditions. From a one-day point of view in South Africa and Australia, from a one-day point of view, he's got 7 matches. He's got 22 wickets at an economy of, I think I can't say, I think it's about 4.8 and a strike rate of 16.9 in there. But again, you'll see what a beautiful arm path and force behind the ball. And he's someone that when you have a close look and they show the camera shots that show the seam positions, he has that ability to bowl with high overspin, and he can also square it up when he needs to, when he's in his own conditions. So technically really well set up, beautiful alignment, really good shoulder path, and a really good arm path. And again, if you go to the next one, see how it stays down that line, and then he completes through to his left side. So again, and go to the next one. I've picked out Mason Crane for a couple because, again, I think he's really well set up. His attributes are off the charts to be able to do well in these conditions, but he's someone that, from a revs point of view, he's, you know, we had him over here last year and we had Trackman on, and he was high 2000s, you know, somewhere near 3000 sometimes, which is off the charts from a revs point of view on there. He is only 23, and quite often a lot of the ones that have those massive high revs can sometimes be a little bit later in their development because it takes time for them to be able to find their release. In there, if you use Stuart McGill's probably a really good example. In there, he debuted for New South Wales at 25, and debuted for Australia at 27. So, you know, it took him, you know, quite some time to be able to develop, you know, his release point and be able to find the accuracy that's going to be able to compete at first class level. But he's someone that, you know, if he's still bowling at 25, you know, and the time's been put into him, I feel as though he's someone that can really, you know, make some ground in our conditions and in non-abrasive conditions and all forms as well in there too. So I think from a white ball, when that kookaburra flattens out after about 7 or 8 overs, he's someone that can be really challenging through middle overs. But it's going to take time. But I think the investment would be worth it. Again, I don't know him from a bar of soap because there's a lot of other attributes that go into it, and we'll sort of talk a little bit about him soon. But he's someone that I look at and go, yeah, he's sort of got it. And quite often, you know, we'll get these guys in probably like England have done, and you know, into their first class systems at 18 and 19, and we expect them to be ready to go then. Whereas, you know, so even if you look at someone like a Pat Cummins, who, you know, Australia were prepared to invest sort of 6 years of him not playing much at all, knowing that when it's right, it's going to be pretty incredible. So, so I think he's someone that you know, given the right people around him, you know, and the opportunity to develop, I suppose, which is going to be the challenge in the first class system over there when county cricket's played in there too. So, so finding ways to developing him is going to be important too. So. Yeah, next slide. Has anyone got any comments around any of those images or anything like that? I know I've been talking at you for a little bit. All good?
So for, you know, I'm going back to the question, I know probably you'll answer it, but what's the rev you look at in terms of baseline that this rev is, if you will, bare minimum? Is there a benchmark like this for fingers?
Yeah, so we've got, again, I mean, it'll probably might be giving away what my answer will be to as far as priorities, but we've got probably 7 or 8 years of data, nearly 10 years of data now, of TrackMan data, and we've got our 16, 17-year-olds in and sort of track them all the way through to hopefully first class cricket in there. So we've sort of got benchmarks for under 17, 18, 19, 20, and then first class spinners for what it takes to be able to bowl spin in our system and in our conditions. So we do have those conditions and those numbers. I probably maybe shouldn't put what they are on there just because it's it's the IP,
but there is a way to profile and baseline based on revs, for example, and that's what you guys do. Is that?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, we do. And quite often, we will find people through our testing and that sort of stuff that we, again, their results in underage cricket might not be quite there. But once they do start to develop their best ball on there, and their best balls become a lot more prevalent than their bad balls in there too, then the results start to happen at an older age. So quite a few that we've identified, there through the testing we've done, have ended up on first class lists and have done well too. So it's been a really, and some of the ones that have had really good results in underage cricket, again, have probably helped their team win some of their carnivals, have probably, but with low revs and probably low attributes, probably haven't gone on there. So again, we'll go back to that when we go through the attributes in there too. But it's incredibly important to us and to our spinners in there too. So again, I mean, we have especially last year, we had a really strong best ball focus in there too. And I think it's really important that the spinners and the coaches around them understand what they need to do to be able to bowl their best ball. So best ball or stock ball in there. Again, if you think about Nathan, just how often he's bowled his stock ball, it'd be mind-boggling how often he's versus any other variation through his test career. Again, Warnie had an unbelievable stock ball. Didn't need to rely on subtle variations and that sort of stuff. That sort of came later in his career, but he could control batters with one ball in there too. So for us, it's really about technically, what do they need to do to be able to bowl that ball potently and consistently, and be able to challenge the batter's defence and ability to score in there too. So one of the things I suppose that help that is their energy at the target, their shoulder and arm path, their body usage, their seam position, and their arm speed in there too. Arm speed is one thing that we sort of know that has a direct reflection on revs in there too. Quite often when we're doing our testing and we have TrackMan there as a coaching aid, we can use it to find their ideal energy output within their actions, because sometimes I suppose there's a certain thing called the gift in their fingers and wrists, and sometimes if they over commit with their arm speed and energy and that sort of stuff, their revs start to drop because their actual the gift that they have in their fingers and wrists doesn't quite catch up with their arm speed, so their revs drop and the trajectory sort of flattens out with the ball in there. So as I say, the TrackMan technology has been an unbelievable coaching aid for us in there, as well as a talent identifier in there too. So and when they do decelerate through their release as well, it shows a real drop off in their revs too. So as I say, everyone's sort of got their ideal energy output in there too. So some people who are incredible athletes, like a Warne, you can back their energy right off, and they can still generate really high revolutions from not a lot of effort, which generally causes comes with a pretty stable, simple action in there too. So technically, I think it's really important that they understand what their ideal line and length is to bring in the most modes of dismissals and have the ability to control the run rate. Physically, again, we spoke about it. Like, are they in a physical condition to be able to bowl the ball potently, consistently for long periods in there? And mentally, do they have the resilience and the courage and routines and body language to keep bowling it under pressure? So these are the things that we did. And last year, Truck will be able to, I suppose, agree with this, that we had an excellent, we have spin month here where we get all the spinners around Australia, and all we did for 2 weeks basically was get them to bowl their best ball. So it was torture for a few people like Lloyd Pope and that who like to bowl their wrong on every second ball in there too. But what we could see that, with T20 cricket, ask them to bowl a carom, a doozer, or a double bouncer, or whatever they want, they can do it. But you ask them to bowl 6 balls where they want it, a lot of them would struggle. So we got it. Literally, they were only allowed to bowl their best ball. And then again, and we drilled a lot of the things technically, use one of Buck's things that they did their daily vitamins, which was to make sure that they were doing the things technically for 15 minutes before their sessions, and then they'd go and bowl their stock ball, and we put them in various conditions of various challenging conditions. Sometimes it was not to a batter, sometimes it was to a batter, and sometimes it was in game conditions, and it culminated with us playing a stock ball game in there where they're only allowed to bowl their stock ball in their one-day game. So, and again, it was an excellent experience because it got to show them just how, if they had the right energy and the right amount of effort, and they can control batters with their best ball in there. And some were probably exposed a little bit, and some really shone out with it in there too. So, so getting to understand what their best ball looks like, I think, is really important in there too. So, so that's pretty much it. If we go back to, the question before, what were the attributes? I'm not sure if you want to put up the poll.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Go through mine.
Craig, so what would you, as Sharad puts it up, I'll put you in a spot. What is your top 2 attributes from your perspective, Craig?
What am I to?
Yes.
Yeah, so I've actually put them on. I've got them on the next page if you want me to show them.
Yes, and then Sharad can put it up. Okay.
Yeah. So I've ranked them in order. They're all important.
Yeah.
Right, but I've tried to rank them as best I could in order. And again, from our point of view, if you're going to be competitive in our conditions, revolutions are sort of the one thing that's shown us all the first class spinners and all the spinners that have been successful. And if you look at Nathan, every time he goes in a Pac-Man data available, he's always at the top on there. And he's also his high revolutions at high overspin, which is incredibly hard to do in there. It's a lot easier to get revolutions with a square seam than it is with an overspun ball. So so revolutions are incredibly important and pretty much mandatory in our conditions in there too. So shape, again, that's about the seam position in there too, because again, we've had people that have had high revolutions with high side spin and probably haven't been as effective in our conditions. And the athletic attributes, again, that ability to be able to transfer energy onto the ball. And I think what it also does is creates really adaptable cricketers to all formats too. So you look at a lot of the spinners that are going around in T20 cricket at the moment, and I'll include Nathan in there from an athletic point of view. But they're all incredible athletes. So you watch Rashid Khan, the way he tears around the outfield. In there, Shadab Khan in there too. And I mean, Ashwin Agar from our point of view in there as well. So, a lot of them are incredible athletes as well as obviously very good bowlers in there too. So technique, I think, again, you would like them to have a reasonably sort of sound technique. There's sometimes you'll come across ones that have sort of obscure techniques, and sometimes I think they might be a little bit best to be left alone and find a way to do it themselves. And you'll quite often see them bob up in T20 cricket or in the shorter form cricket in there too. But we've always sort of looked at and make sure that they've sort of had a reasonably close to sound. I think that's something that you can help them with, especially depending on what age you get them in there. But if you're getting them at around about that sort of 16, 17 year age, you've probably got a 12 to 24 month where you can have a real impact on getting their techniques or their blueprint sort of somewhere near where you would like. In there, anything after that, they're going to build so much muscle memory and have delivered so many balls. It's quite difficult to be able to sort of adjust techniques too much at a later age. In there, accuracy, it's important, but it's not. Again, it's not a deal breaker for me, because I honestly I don't think anyone really cared about Warnie's accuracy at a 17, 18-year-old. Probably Nathan the same. It's just their best ball was unbelievable. So they might have only bowled it 3 times and over as a 17 and 18-year-old, but when it landed, it was incredible. So the accuracy came with time and some sound technical advice from some pretty good coaches in there, and they were able to develop a blueprint or a technique that, coupled with their gifts physical gifts and their gifts in their fingers and wrists, are able to come up with something pretty special in there. Results, again, I suppose going back to some of the stuff that we've already mentioned, that we've had some players that have had unbelievable underage carnivals in here, but guys have sort of leaped ahead of them off some of those other attributes at the top that, and I suppose if we use our two spinners from our under-19 carnival, our under-19 World Cup this year, they were probably two that didn't have as great a results as some others in their underage carnivals, but we picked them on their attributes, and I think Buck might be able to confirm that the two of them were probably two of our best performed players at the World Cup, and probably did quite well, especially our off-finger spinner, who probably shows a lot of the attributes that we've sort of showed in there, did quite well against England and India in that series as well. So tactical now, so I've put at the bottom on there too, and it might be a bit controversial, but I just think that's something that can be coached and can be helped in there. And again, no one really cared about Warney's tactical now at that age, and Nathan's as well. I think even still now, he's got some work to do in that area. He'll be the first to say, and he is making a lot of ground in that area, and he has got a lot of upside. But I think that's something that you actually can have a real impact with, whereas some of the other attributes, it can be a little bit harder. So they're mine.
Awesome. Sharad, do you want to just post it? We have 10 minutes, so wanted to get in comments, questions. So technical blueprint, highest, then the athletic attributes, and then revs, right? And also tactical now was given a big, interesting. So
what's the one down the bottom? So I can't see the bottom one there.
The tactical know-how.
What percentage was that?
59%.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. Again, I suppose it's just my opinion, but I feel as though that's something that you can have a lot of control over from a coaching point of view. Some of those other attributes, it's a little bit more difficult.
Awesome. So, I think their opinions always, Craig, and would love to open up the thing. People would like to probably put in their point of view, or any have any questions.
Hi, Craig.
G'day.
Hi, this is Umesh here. Umesh, I've been working with some teams. So there's a question for you. More of a kind of inquisitive about knowing what's a good ball is basically for spinners. When you say you're looking at the bowlers bowling a lot of good balls, so what definition would you give for a good ball? Is it what the ball takes wickets, or is it what the batsman get beaten, or you think it's just like a stock ball? What's a good ball basically for a spinner?
Well, it's got to have the ability to be able to challenge their defence and also challenge their ability to score on there too. So again, the line that it's bowled, I suppose if you use, from a Nathan strategy point of view, that he's trying to spin the ball to off stump, and he'll generally make his mistakes to the leg side if he makes a mistake in there. So the particular line that he bowls will probably change from day to day, depending on how far it's spinning. So his finishing point is trying to be off stump. He's not trying to pitch it on off stump. So quite often he'll have to pitch it a foot and a half outside off stump because it's turning that much to be able to hit that off stump, because it feels as though...
Is it more to do with length? Is it more to do with length, or is it more to do with line? Correct. That's the...
It's a great question, and I think this is probably where we maybe differ a little bit from a subcontinent to an Australian point of view. I think, and even talking to Sri, who does work with some of our spinners at the international level, that it's the subcontinent's very much about the length, because you get so much spin and variance in bounce and that sort of stuff in those conditions, that your length is crucial. So you can bowl a ball that might be a foot outside off stump or a metre outside off stump, but the fear of it spinning sideways back into the stumps will mean that quite often they might play with more of a straighter bat. But if you get, our numbers say that, in Australian conditions, if you get too wide, if you finish at say fifth stump, the economy rate goes through the roof, in there, and they just from a wicket taking, from a strike rate point of view, it drops right away. So line is really important in our conditions to be able to control run rate in there, and also to be able to increase strike rate. So that's where I feel the difference is in India. Whereas, as I say, you can probably vary your line more in subcontinent conditions as you can in our conditions in there too, because it's much easier to work across the line in our conditions than it is in Indian conditions as well in there too. So especially line from a leg spin point of view, again, that's probably another thing that Warnie might have ruined a little bit in there by pitching leg stump and outside. A lot of our kids have copied, but the fact is he had a really low release point and quite often was letting it go over the umpire's hat. So he could pitch it. He could pitch it leg stump and still challenge the outside edge. Whereas a lot of these guys that are delivering from a higher point and more mid crease, and they're sort of spearing it into leg stump. It's so easy to work to the leg side and they just never challenge the outside edge. So so line is incredibly important in Australia, more so than length is important, but if you actually have a look at Nathan's, the amount of times, I don't think Sri's on this call, but the amount of times that he actually misses his length is quite a bit. But quite often that ball, because it's got so much force and energy on it, will be up around their hips and it's inside edge onto the thigh pad into the couple of guys that are waiting there as well. So, so length probably isn't as major as that line in our conditions. But you don't want to bowl backers and waste eye full tosses, by the way.
Thanks.
Never a good plan.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
No worries.
I think we do have Sri. I think we do have Sri on the webinar today. If you can give us a little bit of insight on the.
Yeah, I mean, this is a discussion that me and Craig have had for a long time. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm not putting on my video. I'm somewhere in quarantine. So, me and Craig have had this discussion a lot, I think. And that's one big adjustment Nathan has made playing in different parts of the world, is to get consistent with his length. Line, as Craig said, is optional. He can keep changing his line, but that 4 to 6 meter length, I think that's something he started to realize whenever bowling outside Australia, that 4 to 6 meter length is incredibly important. And that's when he challenges the defense. And because he's got such big overspin, when he comes to the subcontinent, adapts a little bit, and the amount he gets scored on the back foot is minimized once he gets that length right. So it's an ongoing conversation between me and Howie. I think we've sort of settled somewhere in between.
They're both important.
Yeah.
Awesome. There's a question from Apurva, I see. What about Cooley? Apurva, you wanted to say something? Ask something or other?
I was just probably in relation to the old slides. I'm sorry I popped in halfway through. It was just about the momentum piece that you were saying, because a lot of leg spinners like Tahir, Kumble, Biasir, they've got quite a bit of momentum going in. Would that be affecting the arm release point as you spoke, or like you said, would it assist or go against them in terms of getting the shoulder through, which you compared with Chahal?
Yeah, I think it comes back to the amount of energy and force that they are able to create from, again, depending on their athletic attributes. So again, I'll use probably Warnie as an example. He was able to generate an enormous amount of force. And again, I think he's probably ruined a lot of spinners, a generation of spinners after it, because they all walked up. Some of these kids were sort of skinny and non-athletic sort of kids, and they just could not generate enough force and energy on the ball. So we created a lot of mildly accurate spinners that just didn't spin it enough for our conditions. So I think, again, depending on what the person's attributes are, that some of them will need to get on their bike and need to be able to, especially from a leg spin point of view, run, jump, and to be able to create the right amount of force to challenge the batters in there too. But then you'll have some that are sort of powerful beasts that can generate force. We've got Mitch Swepson, who's someone who probably, he can generate a lot of force. And when he goes too hard, his revs drop off. He gets a bit flat with his trajectory. So, I think it depends on what their attributes are. But for a long time, I was trying to get people to get on their bike and run and jump and put so much more effort into it, and use Cooley as an example. But we just didn't have, I suppose, the the people to tell kids, do what he did, because it was really only Warney through that period. But now we can say, look what Rashid Khan does, look what Shadab Khan does, and these people. So we've now got more reference points to be able to, if someone shows a particular type of attribute, we can sort of steer them in that direction rather than, have everyone just try and create these really simple, still, basic actions that only the really powerful beasts sort of can in there. So I don't know if that helps. But, Cooley was one that sort of had some success here, and I think, again, he bowled high overspin in there too. I think his revs were quite low in there, which probably limited his effect, but he's someone that bowled with very high overspin in there. And again, Rashid Khan's done quite well in the BBL. And if you actually look at his, he bowls all cross seam, but if you actually looked at his seam axis, it's pretty much all overspin. And I've got a ball here, but if it was along the seam, his leg break would be about there and his wrong one would be about there. But it's at the moment,
it's quite past vertical, isn't he? He's almost past vertical, isn't he? Yeah. Rashid.
Yeah, well, he actually bowls. He's a completely different. He bowls it pretty much like a fast bowler slow ball. So he bowls with his back hand is facing the bowler with both balls in there. He just has a slightly different grip for both in there too. So he's probably one that you just put in a basket and don't even try and look at too hard in there because what he does is quite unbelievable.
Right. Cheers, Craig.
I wanted to bring in some other folks here. For example, Jeetan, more. Craig, you talked about profiling, right? And you are actually baselining and seeing the development. And you say that different facets of cricket, spin bowling probably is like, wine. It takes time to get better, if you will, right? So profiling of talent. Wanted to bring in view how are we profiling talent, right? So that what could be interventions, what could be the investment which has to go in. Is this something which is really, if you will, natural evolution, or there is some management and science behind it?
So we have an enormous database. So we do state visits each year where we go around to all the states, and we get all our pathway kids in and we test their revolutions and speed. And again, so we've got an enormous, I suppose, catalogue of all these kids that have come through. So if they do go into play first class cricket, we can go, where was he as a 16-year-old? Where was he as a 17, 18, 19-year-old and that sort of stuff. So, we've got some unbelievable data. We got Warney at the back end. We've got McGill at the back end of their careers, which is good, which gives us a bit of an indication on there. So, I suppose it's only now that we're really starting to be able to use that to be able to identify some players and use it as a tool in their tools. So a lot of it does come down to why. In there, you'll see the shape but it is always good to have that data and that that a bit of fact behind it to go. He actually is spinning it. He's well and truly within our I suppose areas that are required for our conditions.
And Gagan, from our perspective, firstly, Craig, thank you for that. Really enjoyed it. Really did find you listening to that. The question about profiling is an interesting one. And also the question you posed, Craig, on those options and priorities, I thought was interesting. We've done similar in recent years. We ran for a few years this concept of talent testing, a bit like you've done, where we test different age groups, test their attributes. Yeah. We've done quite a lot of analysis on the data, and having learned a few things, not just for spin, we did it for batting, pace bowling. We're going to probably next year, assuming we can still afford to do everything we want to do with COVID, kind of relaunch the next sort of tranche of that with probably more focused assessment now that we kind of know which things are more relevant or not. But the likes of Crane, Best, some of those guys have been through that testing, so we've got some data on them. But I like your emphasis on energy provision, like the guys providing energy in their action. I really like that because that's some of the stuff that's come out of our findings. And when I answered your question, I certainly put physical attributes as quite high up in my mind based on my own insight. But there's plenty of people on this call that know a lot more about spin than I do. But just even some of the data we've got and some of the physical attributes that we've seen that are important, if we're asking a question around young players and identifying, it's a different question to what we're saying around older players and what's important. You had tactical, now slow it down, because rightly you said that can develop over time, and I agree. If we're talking about young players, we've even found things like their shoulder dexterity and flexibility, and the dexterity in their fingers, the ability to generate power energy through their hips, like all those sorts of things are so important, we've found or seen. And obviously we don't have a massive talent pool of brilliant spinners because we haven't produced that many of them, is the reality of it. But the ones that have been better, they've over-indexed on things like shoulder mobility, dexterity, finger dexterity, the ability to generate energy in their body and those physical attributes. So you saying a lot of that has been quite interesting to hear. And then over time, like you say, you can develop accuracy, you can develop tactical nous. Results will come later. Age group results for us have proved non-predictive, basically, for most of our disciplines, not just spin. So I've really enjoyed listening to the stuff that you've said and the things that you've prioritized, quite similar to some of the stuff that we've got, even though we've obviously not produced as many as, certainly the Indians would have done, or the Aussies.
Yeah, and it's certainly the case. And I think, we have the same challenge in our pathway system, where people will pick that spinner that's going to bowl 10 overs for 15 because it's going to help them win the tournament. And quite often at their trials, they've got this kid that bowls these massive balls, massive spinning balls, but he might bowl 2 or 3 bad balls and over, and he just gets cast aside. And again, that's so discouraging for that spinner in there. And I suppose it's just whether it's a lack of understanding of what it takes to be able to bowl at first class level in there. But we certainly have the same issues in ours, and we're continually trying to educate people in there too, to make sure, let's not look at what it looks like now. Let's have a look at what it might look like in 7 years time, 6-7 years time, when they're ready to play first class cricket.
Yeah, and the biggest problem we have, which is probably similar to you, is that whilst you don't have someone in the first team who's nailing it, you're always chasing your tail. So we've got the likes of, and Jeets and Dawson on the call, we've got the likes of Bessie, Jack, even Moeen, Mason. They're having to learn their trade at the highest level under the greatest pressure. That's bloody difficult, and it's not fair. If we had a domestic game where bowling spin was encouraged and rewarded, you've got a different problem. It's much easier to solve. And unfortunately, our conditions don't reward spin bowling, and whatever you reward grows. If it's rewarded, you'll get more of them. Unfortunately, spin bowling is not rewarded in our system. So the likes of Jeets and Dawes, when they're, and even Min, when they're working with our best spinners, you're always chasing your tail. You're having to do it at international level, under pressure, under scrutiny. It's difficult for the lad to develop, and it's difficult to cope. So, that's our domestic problem, which is probably similar to you.
Hi, Mo.
Who's that?
Umesh.
Umesh, how are you, mate?
I'm good. The off spinner has been the highest wicket taker for last 3 seasons. Is it 4 seasons in the English county? Simon Harmer?
Yes.
More than 100 wickets in all the 3 years. And they've been champions twice.
Just a shame he's got the wrong passport.
Sorry?
Got the wrong passport, that's the problem.
No, it's all about, like you said, like spin doesn't help. But I mean, in England, where people thought that spin is not the most important thing. I remember when, what's that leggy from Pakistan who used to play for Surrey or Sussex? He was the highest wicket taker as well. So is it more to do with all these qualities which they have developed through the years of bowling?
Yeah, and it's a really good point. And I suppose what I'm not saying is spin can't be effective here, but to get to a point where you are as good as Harmer, that's the difficult bit.
Not just Harmer, because I remember the leg spinner
Mushi.
Mushi was the highest wicket taker, and they were champions few years. Surrey, is it? Am I right? Or Sussex was it?
Sussex, yeah. And also Sir Clay at Surrey, yeah. So it doesn't mean it can't be effective in these conditions. Also, the additional context is how badly we play spin. So, in general, like in this country, we don't, a bit like what Craig said around the Aussies, we don't face enough of it, so we don't play it as well. So that is additional context, I guess. But you're right.
Okay. Thank you.
Can be successful.
Right. Thanks, Mo.
I think you do.
Craig?
I think you do have slightly more than us. I mean, if we look at our conditions at the moment, we had 10% of our overs last year in first class cricket were frontline spin. If you look at some of Adelaide Oval, 3% of the overs bowled at first class cricket were frontline spin, and in test matches, the last test match I think it was 40% of the overs were spin at over. So our first class wickets bear very little resemblance to our test match conditions, which makes it really hard. And what you're saying is exactly right. Nathan pretty much had to learn his trade at international level. If you were to pick a test match spinner based off their first class records, then Warney never plays and Nathan Lyon never plays. So that's why identifying those attributes are incredibly important.
Oz is about 19%, I think, Craig. Well, it was about 19% spin bowling, and like you say, international cricket's more like 40%, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think you've got. I think when you go to the subcontinent, Ben Folkes is automatically pretty much put in that list because he is someone that he must obviously play in conditions. I don't know enough about it, but he must play in conditions, I suppose, that are spinning. And I was actually going to ask the question because we've sort of put it forward here about the scarification of wickets up to that 4.5 metre mark. Talking to Buck and talking to a few others that Graham Swan and what's his name? Monty. In that they sort of came onto the scene because they were scarifying their wickets. And how was that viewed and how has it sort of worked and are they still doing it and what are the protocols around it?
Well, I could probably answer that a little bit easier for the fact that I've been playing in those conditions recently as well. It's caused a little bit of trouble because obviously clubs want to win games, teams want to win games, and they see spin playing a huge part, especially at the back end of the season. So are they manipulating the wickets too much to then manipulate the results? So there's that fine balance. I promote it for the fact that at least we get back in the game. You know, we know the Duke swings more. We know, the seam stays prouder for longer. So therefore there's more for the seamers to use. But I actually think the Duke's ball is probably the best cricket ball to bowl spin with the fact that it sits on its axis for longer. So there's that. It's a real fine balance of, are you manipulating results whilst encouraging growth in another arm of the game? But it was sort of been a weird time. I mean, Hampshire have been known for using sand on their wickets, and that's fine because it does cause abrasiveness, gets the ball to reverse, but also the ball can grip. So it's I think it's gone the other side of the circle now, where it's starting to get back to flatter wickets that seem to be doing less. I mean, you wouldn't say that by the numbers that are being produced, but I also think that's a tentativeness from the batters now. They're a little bit unsure about how to play. So it's probably gone the other way. Look, I do promote it, but it's got to be. It's almost, it takes away for me that first day spinner and how he adapts to the fourth, fifth day spinner, and I think that's quite important. That if we want to promote these guys to play Test cricket, we all know that on day one it shouldn't be ragging, theoretically. But how do they then adapt? A bit like Nathan Lyon does, where he starts very straight and then moves his line and length depending on the situation of the game. We won't teach them that if it's ragging from ball one. So it is that balance.
I think I think I 100% get it. So that I suppose that was the question: that how much effect does the scarification have in those early conditions? And for me, I mean, we don't want to lose the fact that when we get a good spinner, generally they're very good because the fact that they've had to bowl in pretty brutal conditions. But at the moment, we've got people that are potentially sort of next in line and not even playing first class cricket. So that's the challenge.
Yeah.
Howie,
can I ask a question, mate?
Yeah, mate.
Thanks, mate. It's always a pleasure listening to you, mate. So well done. While we've got all these magical people on the line, I mean, I know the game is the best place to learn your trade. There's no doubt about it, especially if you can get the right challenge matched up to the player and the right stretch. But how much work can you do in the nets? How much development can you do in those nets to get these base, to get that blueprint right, to get that seam position? How much work can you do if you're not getting it in the game? I mean, what sort of a percentage do you put on the nets to develop those skills if you can't quite get them in the game?
Well, obviously an enormous amount, because that's pretty much at the moment the only place that they've got to do it. In there, or in Big Bash, where again they might only bowl their best ball once or twice in an over. So I think the key is when they're doing is to do as much scenario stuff as they possibly can and try and get a little bit of consequence in there. the more centre wicket practice they can have, the better. So it takes away their security blankets so they can see how far the ball goes when it gets whacked, because that's something they're going to have to deal with the big fat bats that everyone uses now. So the more centre wicket hits that you have, and if you do have centre wickets, get your spinners to bowl as much as they possibly can, because that experience is, I've always sort of said that 60 balls in the middle is worth probably 150 in the nets in there. So yeah, so more, as much scenario stuff, as much consequence to actions and that sort of stuff in there as you can for both the batters, because there's no good the batter having no consequence, because he's just going to run at them and bash them over their heads as often as he can and take the piss out of them. So as much consequence you can put on the batter to make it realistic, and battle zones and all the things that we've sort of, we do as well.
Awesome. I mean, I'm pretty sure that this one can go pretty long. There is out of spin bowling. And I really wish, by the way, Troy, that the way you guys have done with straight bat about match versus net, how does bowling perform versus match versus net will be very interesting too. But, we're out of time, so I don't want to keep you guys holding. Amazing. Craig, thank you so much for sharing a lot of your assets, a lot of your IP knowledge with us. I think it was truly fantastic.
Gagan, sorry to cut you. My inquisitive nature is just wanting to ask just one last question.
Go ahead, Rajib.
Could you give me that opportunity?
You are from my hometown. You are from my hometown. I give you that liberty. Rajib, go ahead.
Yeah, so, Craig, you have been talking about the lot of data that you have over the last 10 years, where you have collated everything from the youngsters to the elite level players. So as the ball goes down the air, there are a lot of forces that act on it. And you had been talking about the seam position a lot, and which is a very, the most important ingredient to create all those things. So what do you feel about the axis of rotation? Does a small tilt in the axis of rotation increases the amount of the forces that act in terms of the drifts or the dip, or totally horizontal seam will give you the most?
Yeah. And I suppose the question, again, we were probably going to ask at one stage is, if you had to choose one, if you had to choose curve or drop, and you only have one, which would you choose? And I'm 100% all the time choosing drop.
Yeah.
In there, I suppose Murali's probably the best example of that 800 test wickets, and I don't think I ever saw him curve one out. I saw him curve a lot in, drift in and spin in, but I don't think I saw him curve one out very often at all. So I'm taking overspin and drop over curve every day of the week. But the seam axis is incredibly important. The TrackMan, it's something that we've looked at, and I think shoulder path and that sort of stuff is really important. Wrist position is really important in there too. That's why that quite often they go past the vertical and go towards their right side a little bit, like Yasir Shah. It sort of knocks it off the axis a little bit, which means it's not going to spin as much in our conditions. And in our conditions, you need as pure a seam axis as you possibly can for it to have any chance of spinning. So we haven't got anything that measures seam axis at the moment, but we've got the smart ball coming in there, which hopefully can start to give us some of that sort of data in there too. So
yeah, that's what you cannot measure, you cannot improve. Yeah, and that's so true for everything. Rajib, you were saying something?
Yeah. No, thanks for that. Yeah.
Thank you so much, guys.
I do want Gagan to invent a bracelet that tracks their arm path in there too, because I think the importance of keeping their force behind the ball and their arm behind down the line of the ball is really important in there too. So get onto it, Gagan.
Craig, the blueprint is ready. Yeah, I told you. The blueprint is ready. We need to get it going. Yeah. So awesome. Yeah. Again, thank you so much, people. Amazing start to season 2. Really appreciate your time and meaningful discussion. I hope you had got value out of it too. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Take care.